The dust from a week without rain settled in the air as Daphne Zimmerman reined her horse to a stop at the edge of Whispering Creek. The small frontier town, barely more than a main street, lined with weathered wooden buildings, wasn't much to look at. But after 3 weeks of traveling by stagecoach and horseback across the untamed territories, it looked like salvation to her tired eyes. It was 1878, and the promise of a teaching position had drawn her west from Boston, away from the suffocating expectations of a life she never wanted. "Come now, Penny," she murmured, patting her mare's neck. "Just a little further." The journey had been grueling. The stagecoach had been attacked by bandits near Fort Laramie, and though no passengers were harmed, the experience had left Daphne shaken. Then came the endless days of dust and heat, of sleeping under stars so bright they seemed to pierce the very fabric of the night sky. Now, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street of Whispering Creek, Daphne found herself wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The town was smaller than she'd been led to believe in the correspondence with the town council. A general store, saloon, small church, and what appeared to be a sheriff's office made up the heart of the community. Beyond that, scattered houses and farms dotted the landscape, nestled between rolling hills and the distant mountains that loomed like silent sentinels on the horizon. Daphne straightened her back, adjusted her travel-worn dress, and urged Penny forward. She had come too far to turn back now. Her schoolhouse waited somewhere in this dusty little town, along with the fresh start she so desperately needed. As she rode down the main street, curious eyes followed her progress. A woman traveling alone was still something of a novelty in these parts. Daphne kept her chin high, though her stomach twisted with nerves. She guided Penny toward what appeared to be the general store, figuring it was as good a place as any to ask directions. Just as she was about to dismount, the doors of the saloon across the street burst open. A man stumbled out, clearly in his cups despite the early hour. Behind him came another man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and hardship. He wore a simple cotton shirt, dusty trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes. Unlike the drunk, he moved with purpose and authority. "I told you last time, Frank," the sober man called, his voice carrying across the street. "You start trouble in my saloon, you're not welcome back." The drunk man, Frank, swayed on his feet, then spat in the dirt. "Your saloon," he slurred. "That place belonged to old Hargrove before he got himself killed. Don't make it yours, Jackson." Jackson. The name registered in Daphne's mind. Jackson Zimmerman. The man who'd written to her on behalf of the town council, offering her the teaching position. The man whose letters had convinced her to leave everything behind and travel to this remote corner of Wyoming territory. Before she could call out to him, Frank made a clumsy lunge back toward the saloon. Jackson easily sidestepped, grabbed the man by the collar of his filthy shirt, and marched him toward the sheriff's office. "Sleep it off, Frank," Jackson said, his tone firm but not unkind. "And next time, remember your manners." Daphne watched the interaction with interest. There was something about Jackson Zimmerman, a quiet strength, a dignity that immediately set him apart from the other men she'd encountered on her journey west. She was still watching when a young girl, no more than 7 years old, came running from the direction of the church. The child had long golden-brown braids that bounced with each step, and she wore a simple dress that had seen better days but was clean and well-mended. "Pa," the girl called out, racing toward Jackson. "Pa, Miss Clara says the new teacher's coming today. Is she here yet? Have you seen her?" Jackson turned, his stern expression softening instantly at the sight of his daughter. He knelt down to her level as she reached him, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Not yet, Lily," he said, "but she'll be here soon, I promise." The little girl, Lily, looked crestfallen. "But you said today for sure." "The stage might be running late," Jackson explained patiently. "These things happen out here." Daphne found herself smiling at the interaction. Taking a deep breath, she dismounted and tied Penny to the hitching post outside the general store. Then, gathering her courage, she crossed the dusty street. "Excuse me," she called out as she approached. "I'm looking for Mr. Jackson Zimmerman." Both father and daughter turned to look at her. Jackson's eyes widened slightly in recognition, while Lily's face lit up with excitement. "That would be me, madam," Jackson said, rising to his full height. He was even taller up close, and Daphne had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "And you must be Miss Daphne Zimmerman," she nodded, extending her hand. "I am. I apologize for arriving unannounced." "I thought there would be someone meeting the stage in Laramie, but Laramie," Jackson frowned. "The stage wasn't due in Laramie until tomorrow. You're a day early." "Oh," Daphne felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I must have misunderstood the schedule. When no one was there to meet me, I hired a horse and followed the directions in your letter." Jackson stared at her with newfound respect. "You rode all the way from Laramie, alone." "Yes." She lifted her chin, daring him to comment on the impropriety of it. Instead, a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, Miss Zimmerman, it seems you're better suited to life out here than I anticipated." Before Daphne could respond, Lily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Pa, is she the new teacher, is she?" Jackson nodded. "Yes, Lily, this is Miss Zimmerman. She's come all the way from Boston to teach you and the other children." Lily beamed up at Daphne, blue eyes bright with excitement. "I've been practicing my letters every day, and I can count to 100. Daphne couldn't help but smile back. "That's wonderful, Lily. I'm very impressed." Jackson placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Miss Zimmerman must be tired from her journey. Let's not overwhelm her just yet." He looked up at Daphne. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow, so your lodgings at the boarding house aren't quite ready, but Mrs. Peterson at the general store keeps a spare room for travelers. I'm sure she'd be happy to put you up for the night." "That would be lovely, thank you." Daphne glanced over at the general store, then back to Jackson. "And perhaps tomorrow you could show me the schoolhouse. I'm eager to get settled before classes begin." "Of course." Jackson nodded, then seemed to remember his manners. "You must be hungry after your journey. The saloon serves decent food despite what you might have just witnessed. Would you care to join us for supper?" Lily and I were just about to eat. Daphne hesitated. Dining with a man she'd just met, even if he was the town council representative who'd hired her, wasn't exactly proper. But this was the frontier, not Boston, and she was already breaking countless social norms simply by being here. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, I would be delighted." Jackson's smile reached his eyes this time. "Please call me Jackson, formalities don't last long out here." "Then you must call me Daphne," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Lily tugged at Daphne's skirt. "And I'm Lily." "I'm 6 3/4", Daphne laughed. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lily." As they walked toward the saloon which, as Jackson explained, served as the town's only restaurant as well, Daphne found herself studying the man beside her. He moved with an easy confidence, nodding greetings to townsfolk they passed. There was a gentleness to him, evident in the way he interacted with his daughter, but also a hardness, a resilience forged by whatever circumstances had left him raising a child alone in this untamed place. "So, Mr. Jackson," Daphne corrected herself, "your letters mentioned you're on the town council," he nodded. "Such as it is. Whispering Creek isn't big enough to have a proper mayor yet, so a few of us handle town business. I also own the saloon, though I inherited it rather than chose the profession." "And Lily's mother?" Daphne asked before she could stop herself. She immediately regretted the question when she saw the shadow that passed over Jackson's features. "Sarah passed 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Fever took her and a dozen others in town." "I'm so sorry," Daphne murmured, genuinely contrite. "I shouldn't have pried." "It's all right." Jackson's expression softened. "It's natural to wonder, and I'd rather you heard it from me than through town gossip." They reached the saloon, which was surprisingly quiet this early in the evening. A few men sat at tables playing cards, while a barmaid wiped down the long counter. The place was cleaner than Daphne had expected, with polished wood floors and actual glass in the window signs that Whispering Creek was perhaps more civilized than its small size suggested. Jackson led them to a table in the corner, away from the bar. "Martha," he called to the barmaid, "3 suppers, please, and some coffee." The woman nodded and disappeared through a door at the back, presumably to the kitchen. Lily climbed onto her chair and immediately fixed her bright eyes on Daphne. "Did you ride a horse all the way from Boston?" Daphne smiled. No, I took a train most of the way, then a stagecoach, and only borrowed Penny, that's my horse, outside for the last part of the journey. I have a pony, Lily announced proudly. Her name is Buttercup. Pa says I can't ride her alone until I'm 8, but he takes me riding almost every day. That sounds wonderful, Daphne said. Perhaps you can show me Buttercup sometime. Tomorrow, Lily exclaimed. You can come see our ranch tomorrow, can't she, Pa? Jackson, who had been watching their interaction with an amused expression, nodded. If Miss Zimmerman would like to, yes. I need to show her the schoolhouse anyway, and our place is on the way. I would like that very much, Daphne said, genuinely pleased by the invitation. The idea of seeing more of this rugged country, and perhaps learning more about the intriguing man across the table, was appealing. Martha returned with 3 plates of food, simple fare. But the aroma of roasted meat and vegetables made Daphne's stomach rumble. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. As they ate, Lily chattered away about the town, the other children who would be in the school, and her excitement about learning to read real books. Jackson mostly listened, occasionally correcting his daughter when her enthusiasm led to exaggeration, but mostly letting her talk. "And what about you, Daphne?" Jackson asked during a rare lull in Lily's monologue. "What brought you all the way from Boston to teach in a place like Whispering Creek?" Daphne hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I suppose I was looking for a change," she said carefully. "An adventure of sorts." Jackson's eyes, a deep blue that reminded Daphne of the ocean on a stormy day, studied her face. "Must have been quite the change you were after to come all this way." There was something in his tone, not judgment, but understanding, that made Daphne want to tell him more than she'd planned. "My father died last year," she said, surprising herself with her candor. "He was a professor at Harvard. After he passed, there was pressure for me to marry a colleague of his, a suitable match according to my mother." "But not suitable to you," Jackson guessed. Daphne shook her head. "No, Professor Hargrove was a brilliant man, but he saw me as an extension of my father's legacy, not as a person in my own right. I'd been teaching at a girls' school in Boston, and I realized I wanted more from life than to be someone's suitable wife." Jackson nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Well, you'll certainly find different expectations out here. People care more about what you can contribute than who your family is or who you might marry." "That's precisely what I was hoping for," Daphne admitted. Lily, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly piped up. "Are you going to stay forever, Miss Daphne?" "The last teacher only stayed 1 winter, and then she married Mr. Peterson and they moved to Denver." Jackson gave his daughter a gentle but reproachful look. "Lily, that's not a proper question to ask someone you've just met." "It's quite all right," Daphne assured him. "I don't know how long I'll stay, Lily, but I promise I won't leave before the school year is finished. After that, well, we shall see." This seemed to satisfy the child, who went back to eating her supper with renewed vigor. After the meal, Jackson insisted on walking Daphne to the general store to arrange her lodging for the night. Lily skipped ahead of them, occasionally stopping to examine something of interest in the dirt road. "I should warn you," Jackson said in a low voice, "the children here aren't like the ones you might have taught in Boston. Some of them have never seen a proper school before. Others have been working alongside their parents since they could walk. They're good children, but wild." Daphne suggested with a smile. Jackson chuckled. "I was going to say independent, but wild might be more accurate for some of them." "I look forward to the challenge," Daphne said honestly. "In Boston, most of my students were from wealthy families. Their futures were predetermined. Here, I have a chance to make a real difference." They reached the general store just as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Lily had already run ahead into the store, calling for Mrs. Peterson. "I'll have your trunk brought over from the saloon," Jackson said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "And I'll come by around 9 tomorrow morning to show you the schoolhouse if that suits you." "That would be perfect," Daphne replied. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for your kindness today, Jackson. It means more than you know." Something flickered in his eyes, something warm and perhaps a bit surprised. "It's nothing," he said softly. "We're glad to have you here, Daphne." The way he said her name, with a gentle emphasis on the first syllable, made her heart beat just a little faster. It was ridiculous, of course. She'd known the man for all of a few hours. And yet, there was something about Jackson Zimmerman that felt inexplicably familiar, as though they'd known each other in some other life. "Good night," she said, breaking the moment before it could linger too long. "Good night," he replied. "Welcome to Whispering Creek." As Daphne watched him walk away, Lily's small hand tucked in his, she couldn't help but smile. Perhaps this wild, dusty town was exactly where she was meant to be, Mrs. Peterson turned out to be a kindly widow in her 60s, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense manner that Daphne immediately respected. She showed Daphne to a small but clean room at the back of the store, separated from the main building by a short, covered walkway. "It ain't much," Mrs. Peterson said, lighting a lamp on the bedside table, "but it's private and the bed's comfortable." "It's perfect," Daphne assured her, taking in the simple furnishings: a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. After weeks of travel, sleeping in stagecoach stations and under the stars, it looked like luxury. "Bathrooms out back," Mrs. Peterson continued. "I keep hot water on the stove if you want a proper wash. Breakfast is at 7 sharp. "Thank you," Daphne said sincerely. "I can't tell you how grateful I am." Mrs. Peterson waved away her thanks. "We're just glad you're here, Miss Zimmerman. This town needs a good teacher, and Jack Zimmerman's been moving heaven and earth to get one." "Jack?" Daphne questioned. "I thought his name was Jackson." "Jackson's what he goes by now," Mrs. Peterson explained, a hint of something sadness perhaps in her eyes. "But those of us who have known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper still call him Jack sometimes. Force of habit." "You've known him a long time then," Mrs. Peterson nodded. "Since he was born. His father, old Henry Zimmerman, was one of the first settlers in these parts. Built that ranch of theirs with his bare hands, he did. Jack was just a boy when Henry passed. 17, I think. Took over the whole operation, raised his younger brothers, kept the family together." She smiled fondly. "Always was a responsible one, our Jack." Daphne absorbed this information with interest. It explained the quiet strength she'd sensed in Jackson, the natural authority he seemed to carry. "And Lily's mother?" she asked hesitantly. "Jackson mentioned she passed away from fever." "Sarah." Mrs. Peterson's face softened. "Lovely girl. Came out from St. Louis to teach, just like you. Jack fell for her hard and fast. They had 6 good years together before the fever took her." The older woman sighed. "Nearly broke him losing her like that, but he had Lily to think of, so he pushed through." "How terrible," Daphne murmured, her heart aching for the man she'd just met and the little girl who'd lost her mother so young. "It was," Mrs. Peterson agreed, "but that's life out here, beautiful and brutal in equal measure." She moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to rest. Your trunk should arrive shortly." After Mrs. Peterson left, Daphne sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. She'd arrived in a strange town, met the man who'd hired her who, it turned out, was a widower with a precocious daughter, and somehow already felt more at home than she ever had in Boston. She moved to the window and gazed out at the darkening sky. Stars were already appearing, impossibly bright and numerous compared to the city skies she was used to. In the distance, she could make out the silhouette of mountains against the deepening blue. It was wild and beautiful and utterly foreign. "What have you gotten yourself into, Daphne Zimmerman?" she whispered to herself. But despite the uncertainty, despite the strangeness of her new surroundings, she felt a sense of rightness. As though all the twists and turns of her life had been leading her here, to this moment, to this place, to Jackson Zimmerman and his daughter. She shook her head, dismissing the fanciful thought. She was here to teach, to make a new life for herself. Not to fall for the first handsome widower she met, no matter how kind his eyes or how endearing his relationship with his daughter. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, Daphne couldn't help but look forward to the morning when she would see them both again. True to his word, Jackson arrived at the general store at 9 the next morning. Daphne had been up since dawn, too excited to sleep late. She'd already eaten breakfast with Mrs. Peterson, helped open the store, and changed her dress twice before settling on a simple blue cotton that was practical yet becoming. Jackson had Lily with him, the little girl bouncing with energy beside her father. They'd brought a horse for Daphne, not Penny, who needed rest after the long journey, but a gentle mare named Daisy. "Good morning," Jackson greeted her, tipping his hat. In the bright morning light, Daphne could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of years spent squinting into the sun. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Daphne replied, smiling at both father and daughter. "I feel quite refreshed." "Miss Daphne," Lily exclaimed, unable to contain herself any longer. "Pa says we can show you our ranch first and then the school, and you can meet Buttercup." "That sounds wonderful," Daphne said, genuinely pleased by the child's enthusiasm. She turned to Jackson. "If you're sure it's not too much trouble." "No trouble," he assured her. "The ranch is on the way to the schoolhouse, and it'll give Lily a chance to burn off some of that energy before we get there." Daphne laughed. A wise strategy. With Jackson's help, she mounted Daisy, adjusting her skirts as modestly as possible. She was thankful she'd had the foresight to pack riding clothes for her journey west, though they were hardly suitable for a first tour of her new workplace. They set off at a leisurely pace, Lily riding her pony between Jackson and Daphne. The morning was clear and crisp, with the promise of heat later in the day. As they left the small town behind, Daphne was struck by the vastness of the landscape, rolling hills covered in golden grass, dotted with scrubby trees, and in the distance, the ever-present mountains. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Jackson glanced over at her. "Different from Boston, I imagine." "Very," she agreed, "but in the best possible way. There's such space here, room to breathe," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why most of us came west. Room to breathe, room to build something of our own." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, with only Lily's occasional comments breaking the quiet. The child seemed to know every rock and tree along the way, pointing out landmarks with proprietary pride. "And that's where I saw a real live fox last winter," she exclaimed, pointing to a copse of trees. "Pa says they usually stay up in the hills, but this one came down looking for food cause of all the snow." "How exciting," Daphne replied, charmed by the child's enthusiasm for the natural world around her. "What other animals have you seen?" This launched Lily into a detailed catalog of wildlife sightings, from common deer and rabbits to more exciting encounters with coyotes, eagles, and once, a black bear that had wandered too close to the chicken coop. "Pa shot his gun in the air to scare it away," Lily explained seriously. "He didn't want to hurt it less he had to." Daphne glanced at Jackson, who was watching his daughter with quiet pride. "A merciful approach," she observed. "The bear was just hungry," Jackson said with a shrug. "No sense in killing a creature for following its nature." There was wisdom in his words, Daphne thought. A respect for the land and its inhabitants that spoke of a man who understood his place in the natural order of things. After about 30 minutes of riding, they crested a small hill, and Jackson's ranch came into view. It was larger than Daphne had expected, a substantial log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals for horses, and beyond them, open pasture where cattle grazed. A small creek ran along one edge of the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. "Welcome to the Double Z," Jackson said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Been in my family for almost 30 years now." "It's impressive," Daphne said honestly. "You built all this." "My father started it," Jackson explained as they rode down toward the house. "I've added to it over the years." The barn is new, built it last summer after a lightning strike burned the old one. As they approached the house, a tall, lean man emerged from one of the outbuildings. He raised a hand in greeting, then walked toward them. "That's Jed," Jackson explained, "my foreman. Been with the ranch almost as long as I have." Jed turned out to be a weathered man in his 50s, with a handlebar mustache and kind eyes. He greeted Daphne respectfully, though she could see the curiosity in his gaze. "Miss Zimmerman is our new school teacher," Jackson explained. "She arrived yesterday, a day ahead of schedule. Rode all the way from Laramie by herself," Lily added proudly, as though Daphne's accomplishment somehow reflected well on her. Jed's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Well, welcome to Whispering Creek, madam. Sounds like you'll fit right in around here." "Thank you," Daphne replied, warmed by the genuine welcome. While Jackson conferred briefly with Jed about some ranch business, Lily tugged Daphne toward the corral where her pony was kept. Buttercup turned out to be a gentle dun-colored pony with a cream-colored mane and tail, who nuzzled Lily's hand affectionately when the child offered her an apple. "Pa says she's the perfect size for me," Lily explained, stroking the pony's nose. "And when I get bigger, I can ride a real horse like he does." "She's lovely," Daphne said. "You're very fortunate to have such a fine pony." Lily beamed at the compliment. "Do you want to see my room? It has a window that looks out at the mountains, and Pa made me a bookshelf all my own." Before Daphne could respond, Jackson joined them. "Are you pestering Miss Zimmerman, Lily?" "No, Pa, I'm just showing her Buttercup," Lily protested. "And I wanted to show her my room too." Jackson glanced at Daphne. "We do have time for a quick tour of the house if you'd like." "But don't feel obligated." "I'd love to see it," Daphne assured him. In truth, she was curious about the home Jackson had built, about the life he and Lily shared. The house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture built to last rather than to impress. The main floor consisted of a large living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with an actual cast iron stove, a luxury in these parts, Daphne knew, and what appeared to be Jackson's bedroom. Upstairs were 2 more bedrooms, one for Lily, and another that Jackson explained was for his brothers when they visited from their own ranches further west. Lily's room was exactly what one would expect of a 6-year-old girl with an indulgent father. The promised bookshelf held a dozen or so volumes, more than many frontier children could claim, and a collection of treasures. Pretty stones, bird feathers, a carved wooden horse that Jackson had apparently made for her last Christmas. "It's a wonderful room," Daphne told the beaming child. "Perfect for a growing girl." As they prepared to leave for the schoolhouse, Daphne found herself lingering in the living room, drawn to the small collection of photographs displayed on the mantel. One showed a younger Jackson standing beside a beautiful dark-haired woman who could only be Sarah. They were both smiling, his arm around her waist, her hand resting protectively over the swell of her pregnant belly. "That was taken about a month before Lily was born," Jackson said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Daphne startled slightly, not having heard him approach. "She was beautiful," she said softly. "Yes," Jackson agreed, his voice tinged with old grief. "She was. Lily looks like her," Daphne observed, noting the similar shape of their eyes, the curve of their smiles in another photograph that showed mother and daughter together. "She does," Jackson nodded. "In temperament as well as appearance. Same stubborn streak, same curiosity about everything." There was love in his voice, but also a profound sadness. Daphne fought the urge to reach out and touch his arm, to offer comfort for a loss she could only imagine. "You've done a remarkable job with her," she said instead. "She's a delightful child." Jackson's expression softened. "Thank you. It hasn't always been easy raising her alone, but she's the light of my life." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or simply a recognition of shared values. Whatever it was, it made Daphne's breath catch in her throat. The moment was broken by Lily bounding back into the room, announcing she was ready to show Miss Daphne the schoolhouse now. "Please." The ride to the school was shorter than Daphne had expected, only about 15 minutes from the ranch. The building itself was small but solidly constructed, with a bell tower on top and a flagpole out front. Fresh white paint gleamed in the morning sun, and flower beds flanked the front steps, though they were currently empty, waiting for spring planting. "It's not what you're used to, I'm sure," Jackson said as they dismounted, "but we're proud of it. Every family in the district contributed something, labor, materials, whatever they could spare." "It's perfect," Daphne said honestly, already envisioning lessons and children's laughter filling the space. "When was it built?" "About 4 years ago," Jackson replied, unlocking the front door. "Before that, classes were held in the church when the circuit preacher wasn't using it." Inside, the schoolhouse was one large room with a wood stove in the center for heat. Rows of simple desks faced a larger teacher's desk at the front. A blackboard covered most of one wall, and bookshelves, sadly underfilled, lined another. Windows on both sides provided natural light, and there was a small anteroom that Jackson explained served as a cloakroom and storage area. "We've got about 20 children enrolled," he continued as Daphne explored the space. "Ages 6 to 15. Most of the older ones can only attend in the winter when farm work is lighter." "I understand," Daphne nodded. It was the same in many rural areas back east. Lily had gone straight to one of the smaller desks in the front row. "This one's mine," she announced proudly. "Miss Clara let me sit right up front 'cause I'm a good listener." "I'm sure you are." Daphne smiled at the child's obvious enthusiasm for school, a teacher's dream. Jackson opened a drawer in the teacher's desk and pulled out a ledger book. "This has all the students' names and ages." Miss Clara, the previous teacher, kept some notes about their progress, though I'm afraid she left rather abruptly when Mr. Peterson proposed. Daphne took the book, her fingers brushing Jackson's in the process. She ignored the small jolt that passed through her at the contact. "This will be very helpful, thank you. There are some books and supplies in that cabinet," Jackson continued, moving to a tall cupboard in the corner. "Not nearly enough, but we make do. The town council has approved funds for more, which you can order from the catalog at the general store." Daphne was impressed by the organization and thought that had gone into the school. It was clear that education was valued in this small community, despite the challenges of frontier life. "When does the term begin?" she asked. "Monday," Jackson replied. "Which gives you the rest of today and the weekend to settle in and prepare. Your permanent lodgings will be ready by this evening. There's a small house behind the church that comes with the teaching position. It's not much, but it's private." "That sounds perfect," Daphne said, already mentally arranging her few possessions in the new space. They spent another hour at the schoolhouse, with Jackson explaining the daily schedule and various community expectations. Lily, bored with adult conversation, had wandered outside to pick wildflowers along the edge of the schoolyard. "One last thing," Jackson said as they prepared to leave. "Most of the children will bring their own lunches, but some come from families that struggle. There's a fund for providing basic meals for those children. Mrs. Peterson can show you how it works." Daphne nodded, touched by this evidence of community care. "Thank you for telling me." Outside, they found Lily had made a small bouquet of prairie flowers. "These are for you, Miss Daphne," she said, presenting them shyly. "For your new house." "Thank you, Lily," Daphne said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "They're beautiful." They rode back to town, Lily chattering excitedly about the upcoming school year, while Jackson and Daphne exchanged amused glances over her head. By the time they reached the general store, it was past noon, and Mrs. Peterson insisted they all stay for lunch. "Your house is ready," she told Daphne as they ate sandwiches at the small table behind the store. "The church ladies have been cleaning it all morning, got fresh linens on the bed and everything." "That's so kind," Daphne said, overwhelmed by the town's generosity. "I don't know how to thank everyone. Just teach our young uns well," Mrs. Peterson replied matter-of-factly. "That's thanks enough." After lunch, Jackson offered to help move Daphne's trunk to her new home. They left Lily with Mrs. Peterson, who promised to show the girl how to make peppermint sticks, a rare treat that had the child wide-eyed with anticipation. The teacher's house turned out to be a small but charming cottage, with a front porch just big enough for a rocking chair, a combined living and kitchen area, a bedroom, and a small washroom, a luxury Daphne hadn't expected. Like the school, it was freshly painted and scrupulously clean. Someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the small dining table different from the ones Lily had picked, suggesting that someone else in town had the same welcoming instinct. "Well," Jackson said, setting down her trunk in the bedroom. "What do you think?" Daphne turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Better than I dared hope for." Jackson smiled, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. "Good, we want you to be comfortable here, Daphne, happy even." There was something in the way he said it, something personal rather than communal, that made her heart beat a little faster. "I think I will be," she replied, meeting his gaze. "Happier than I've been in a long time, perhaps." A moment stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither was ready to name. Then Jackson cleared his throat and stepped back. I should let you get settled, he said. But I was wondering, there's a town social tomorrow night at the church. Sort of a welcome for you, and a last hurrah before the school year starts. Would you allow me to escort you? Daphne hesitated only briefly. She had come west partly to escape the rigid social conventions of Boston. Why not embrace the more relaxed attitudes of her new home? I would like that very much, she said. Thank you. The smile that spread across Jackson's face was worth any potential impropriety. Good, I'll pick you up at 6 then. After he left, Daphne spent the afternoon arranging her few possessions in her new home, marveling at the turns her life had taken in such a short time. Just weeks ago, she had been a proper Boston lady, expected to make a suitable match and live a predictable life. Now she was a frontier schoolteacher with a small house of her own and, what? A potential suitor in the form of a handsome, widowed rancher. She shook her head at her own fanciful thoughts. Jackson was simply being kind to the newcomer, showing the hospitality for which the West was famous. It would be foolish to read more into his actions. And yet, when she placed Lily's wildflowers in a cup of water on her bedside table, she couldn't help but smile at the thought of seeing both father and daughter again tomorrow. The town social exceeded all of Daphne's expectations. The church had been transformed with paper lanterns and ribbons. Tables groaned under the weight of home-cooked dishes brought by every family in the district, and someone had even rigged a proper dance floor in the churchyard, complete with a small band of local musicians. Jackson arrived promptly at 6 to escort her, looking handsome in a clean white shirt and dark waistcoat. Lily was with him, wearing a pretty blue dress that matched her eyes and practically vibrating with excitement. "You look beautiful, Miss Daphne," the child exclaimed upon seeing her in a simple but elegant green dress, one of the few fine things Daphne had brought from Boston. "Thank you, Lily," Daphne replied, then glanced up to find Jackson staring at her with undisguised admiration. "Lily's right," he said softly. "You look lovely." The evening was a whirlwind of introductions, as it seemed everyone in town wanted to meet the new teacher. Daphne did her best to remember names and faces, knowing these people would be entrusting their children to her care. She was struck by the diversity of the community farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and tradesmen, even a few professionals like Doc Wilson and Judge Parker, who presided over the territorial court circuit. Throughout it all, Jackson remained by her side, a steady presence that made the overwhelming experience manageable. He seemed to know everyone, offering quiet explanations and introductions that helped Daphne navigate the social waters. After supper, the dancing began. Daphne watched as couples took to the floor, moving through simple country dances with enthusiasm if not always precision. Lily had joined a group of children playing tag around the perimeter of the church, her laughter carrying across the evening air. "Would you care to dance?" Jackson asked, offering his hand. Daphne hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you, I only know formal ballroom dances, nothing like this," he smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just follow my lead, it's not so different," and it wasn't really. The steps were simpler, the pace more lively, but the fundamental joy of moving to music with a partner remained the same. Jackson was a surprisingly good dancer, leading with confidence but without forciness. By the end of the first song, Daphne was laughing, caught up in the simple pleasure of the moment. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break for lemonade. Finding a quiet spot under a tree at the edge of the churchyard, they watched the festivities continue around them, having fun. Jackson asked, his voice low and intimate despite the noise of the gathering. "More than I've had in years," Daphne admitted. "Everyone has been so welcoming." "They're good people," Jackson nodded. "Salt of the earth, my father used to say." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Lily came running up, breathless from play. "Pa, Miss Daphne, the kids are all going to play hide and seek in the churchyard. Can I play too, please?" "Stay where I can see the hiding spots," Jackson instructed. "And no going past the creek, understood?" "Yes, Pa." Lily was already turning to run back to her friends when she suddenly stopped and looked back at Daphne. "Miss Daphne, do you know how to play hide and seek?" Daphne laughed. "I do, though it's been many years since I played." "You should play with us." Lily suggested, her eyes bright with excitement. Oh, I don't think, go on, Jackson encouraged, amusement dancing in his eyes. It might be good for the children to see their teacher as a real person before school starts. Put that way, how could she refuse? Daphne found herself drawn into the game, much to the delight of the children. She made a show of searching for them, pretending not to see obvious hiding spots until the children dissolved into giggles, giving themselves away. When it was her turn to hide, she slipped behind the church, finding a spot between two rain barrels that was hidden from the main yard but still within Jackson's line of sight. She had just settled in when she heard footsteps approaching. Expecting to see one of the children, she was surprised when Jackson appeared around the corner. "They're all looking on the other side," he said, smiling as he leaned against the wall beside her. "I thought you might like some company while you wait to be found." "Won't they think it strange that we're both missing?" Daphne asked, though she made no move to leave her hiding spot. Jackson shrugged. "Probably, but I'm not playing the game, so they can't accuse me of cheating." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of children calling to each other and adults laughing around the dance floor. "You're good with them," Jackson said suddenly. "The children, I mean, they already adore you." "I've always loved teaching," Daphne replied. "There's something magical about watching a child grasp a new concept, seeing that moment of understanding dawn in their eyes." "Sarah felt the same way," Jackson said softly. "She used to say that teaching was like planting seeds. You might not see the harvest, but you know you've contributed to something important." "She sounds like she was a wonderful teacher," Daphne said carefully, aware they were treading on sensitive ground. "She was," Jackson nodded. "But she was an even better mother, she would have." He paused, swallowing hard. She would have given anything to see Lily grow up. Without thinking, Daphne reached out and placed her hand on his arm. "I'm sure she would be very proud of the job you're doing," she said gently. "Lily is a remarkable child." Jackson looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "Thank you," he said simply. Before either could say more, they heard Lily's voice calling from nearby. "Miss Daphne, where are you?" "Behind the church," Daphne called back, reluctantly stepping away from Jackson and out of her hiding spot. Lily came running around the corner, her face lighting up when she saw them both. "Found you, and Pa too." The moment was broken, but something had changed between them. As they rejoined the social, Daphne was acutely aware of Jackson's presence beside her, of the occasional brush of his hand against hers as they walked. There was an unspoken promise in those brief contacts, a hint of possibilities to come. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. Daphne danced with several other young farmers eager to impress the new teacher. Judge Parker, who gallantly claimed a dance despite his advanced years. Even young Tommy Wilson, the doctor's 12-year-old son who wanted to practice his newly learned steps. But it was the dances with Jackson that she would remember, the way his hand felt at her waist, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the sense that something important was beginning between them. As the evening wound down, parents gathered sleepy children and said their goodbyes. Lily, fighting valiantly against exhaustion, had finally succumbed and fallen asleep on a bench near the church steps. "I should get her home," Jackson said, lifting his daughter gently into his arms. She stirred slightly, then settled against his chest with complete trust. The sight made Daphne's heart constrict with unexpected emotion. "Of course," she nodded. "It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you for including me. May I call on you tomorrow?" Jackson asked as they walked slowly toward her cottage. "Perhaps in the afternoon. There's a spot by the creek I'd like to show you. It's peaceful, good for thinking, might help with your lesson planning." "I'd like that," Daphne replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. They reached her door, and an awkward moment ensued, the traditional goodbye of a courtship call, complicated by the sleeping child in Jackson's arms. "Until tomorrow, then," he said softly. "Until tomorrow," Daphne echoed, holding his gaze for a moment longer than strictly proper. As she watched him walk away, Lily cradled against his chest, Daphne felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This place, these people, they were becoming important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated, especially Jackson and Lily Zimmerman. The next day dawned bright and clear, a perfect late summer day in the Wyoming Territory. Daphne spent the morning at the schoolhouse, organizing textbooks and planning lessons for her diverse group of students. She was just finishing when she heard the sound of horses outside. Jackson had come as promised, though he was alone this time. "Lily's helping Mrs. Peterson make preserves," he explained as they rode away from town. "She was so excited about it that I didn't have the heart to pull her away. She's a wonderful child," Daphne said sincerely. "So enthusiastic about everything." "She gets that from her mother," Jackson replied, his tone fond rather than sad. Sarah approached life with the same energy. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, following the creek that gave the town its name as it wound through rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen trees. The water gurgled pleasantly over rocks, providing a soothing soundtrack to their journey. After about 20 minutes, the creek widened into a small pond, ringed by willows whose branches dipped to touch the water's surface. A large, flat rock jutted out over one edge, creating a natural viewing platform. "It's beautiful," Daphne breathed as they dismounted. "So peaceful." "I come here to think," Jackson said, tying their horses to a nearby tree. "When decisions need making or troubles need sorting." "And do you find your answers?" Daphne asked, following him to the rock. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and softened the weathered lines of his face. "Sometimes. Other times I just find a moment's peace, which is answer enough." They sat side by side on the sun-warmed stone, looking out over the water. Dragonflies darted above the surface, and somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called to its mate. "I brought lunch," Jackson said after a while, producing a cloth-wrapped bundle from his saddlebag. "Nothing fancy, just some of Mrs. Peterson's bread, cheese, and dried apple slices." "It looks perfect," Daphne assured him. And it was simple food shared in a beautiful setting with companionable conversation. They talked of his ranch, her plans for the school, the changing seasons, and a dozen other topics that flowed naturally between them. "May I ask you something personal?" Jackson said as they finished the last of the apples. Daphne nodded, curious. "Of course. Why didn't you want to marry that professor back in Boston? Was it just that you didn't love him, or was there more to it?" The question surprised her, not just in its directness, but in the genuine interest behind it. Jackson wasn't making polite conversation, he truly wanted to understand. "I didn't love him," Daphne acknowledged. "But more than that, he didn't see me, not really. He saw a convenient addition to his life, an educated woman who could manage his household, bear his children, and provide intelligent conversation when required, but who wouldn't challenge his views or have ambitions of her own." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want more than that. I want to be seen for who I am, not for who someone wants me to be. I want a partnership, not an arrangement." Jackson nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "That seems reasonable to me." "It wasn't to my mother," Daphne sighed. "She thought I was throwing away my best chance at her respectable life. Maybe I was, by her standards, but I couldn't bring myself to settle for less than what I believe is possible." "And what do you believe is possible, Daphne Zimmerman?" Jackson asked quietly. She looked at him, then really looked, taking in the strength and gentleness that coexisted in him, the intelligence in his blue eyes, the way he listened as though her words mattered. "I believe it's possible to find someone who sees you clearly and loves what they see," she said softly. "Someone who stands beside you rather than above or below you, someone who makes you more yourself, not less." Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a recognition, perhaps, or a decision being made. "I believe that too," he said, his voice low and intent. "I had it once with Sarah. I never thought I'd find it again." The implication hung in the air between them, too new and fragile to be stated directly, but too powerful to be ignored. Before either could speak again, the distant rumble of thunder broke the moment. They looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving quickly in their direction. "We should head back," Jackson said, reluctantly standing and offering her his hand. "These summer storms can be fierce, and there's not much shelter here." They rode back faster than they had come, the approaching storm lending urgency to their journey. They were still about 10 minutes from town when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a steady downpour. "My place is closer," Jackson shouted over the growing wind. "This way." They veered off toward his ranch, the horses picking up speed as the rain intensified. By the time they reached the shelter of his barn, they were both soaked through, their clothes clinging uncomfortably. "Well, that was invigorating," Daphne laughed, pushing wet strands of hair from her face as they dismounted inside the barn. Jackson grinned, shaking water from his hat before hanging it on a peg. "Not exactly how I planned our afternoon." "The best adventures rarely go according to plan," she replied, the words coming easily despite her shivering. Concern crossed his features. "You're cold. Let's get you up to the house. Sarah left some clothes that might fit you. You can change while I make coffee to warm us up." The intimacy of wearing his late wife's clothes gave Daphne pause, but practicality won out over sentiment. She nodded gratefully and followed him through the rain to the house. Inside, Jackson quickly built up the fire while Daphne waited, trying not to drip too much on his floor. Once the flames were crackling, he disappeared into his bedroom, returning moments later with a simple blue dress and a towel. "These should fit well enough," he said, handing them to her. "You can change in Lily's room. Take your time." The dress was indeed a good fit, though slightly loose in the bodice. The fabric was soft from many washings, the style simple but flattering. As Daphne toweled her hair dry and arranged it as best she could without a proper brush, she tried not to think about the woman who had worn this dress before her, the woman Jackson had loved and lost. It felt strange, stepping into a space that had belonged to Sarah, however temporarily. When she returned downstairs, she found Jackson had also changed into dry clothes and was setting 2 steaming cups of coffee on the table. "Thank you for the dress," she said, gesturing to her borrowed attire. "It fits well." "It suits you," he replied, then quickly added, "I mean the color. It brings out your eyes." The slight awkwardness of the moment faded as they sat at the table, warming their hands around their cups as rain pattered against the windows and thunder rolled in the distance. "Lily will be disappointed to have missed the excitement," Daphne observed. "She seems to enjoy adventures." "She does," Jackson agreed with a fond smile. "Too much sometimes. I worry about her growing up so wild out here with only me to guide her." "You're doing a wonderful job," Daphne assured him. "She's bright, kind, enthusiastic about learning everything a child should be. But she needs more than I can give her," Jackson said quietly. "A mother's influence, a woman's guidance as she grows." He hesitated, then added, "Sarah's been gone 3 years now. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, not remarrying for Lily's sake." The conversation had taken an unexpectedly personal turn, and Daphne wasn't sure how to respond. "Have you considered remarrying?" she asked carefully. Jackson looked at her steadily. "There haven't been many opportunities. Eligible women are scarce out here." A slight smile tugged at his lips. "At least they were until recently." Daphne felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "I see. Do you?" he asked softly. "Because I want to be clear, Daphne. I find myself thinking about you far more than is probably proper, given how short a time we've known each other." The directness of his statement both startled and pleased her. There were no games here, no hidden meanings to decipher. "Time is measured differently out here, I think," she replied, matching his honesty with her own. "Days feel fuller, more significant." "They do," he agreed, "especially lately." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Outside, the storm raged on, creating a cocoon of intimacy around them in the warm, firelit room. "I should take you back to town once the storm passes," Jackson said finally, reluctance evident in his tone. "Before tongues start wagging." "Yes," Daphne nodded, equally reluctant. "That would be best." But the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it intensified, with lightning splitting the sky and thunder shaking the very foundations of the house. After an hour of waiting, it became clear that returning to town that evening would be impossible. "The creek will be flooded by now," Jackson explained, looking troubled. "It's not safe to cross after a heavy rain like this." "I understand," Daphne assured him, though she was keenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. An unmarried woman spending the night at a bachelor's home, regardless of the circumstances, would be scandalous even in the more relaxed social atmosphere of the frontier. As if reading her thoughts, Jackson added, "Jed will be here and I'll sleep in the barn. Your reputation will remain intact." "I appreciate your concern," Daphne said, touched by his thoughtfulness, "but I don't want to force you out of your own home." "It's no hardship," he insisted. "I've slept in far worse places." Before they could debate the matter further, the front door burst open, and Lily ran in, followed by a slightly harried-looking Mrs. Peterson. "Pa, Miss Daphne," Lily exclaimed, clearly delighted to find them together. "We got caught in the rain too, Mrs. Peterson says I have to stay with her tonight because the creek's too high, but now I don't have to because you're both here." Mrs. Peterson gave them an apologetic look. "The bridge near town is underwater. I thought it best to bring her here rather than try to make it to my place." Her shrewd eyes took in Daphne's borrowed dress and slightly damp hair, but she made no comment. "Of course," Jackson nodded, going to take his daughter's wet coat. "Thank you for bringing her home safely." "I'll just be going then," Mrs. Peterson said, turning back toward the door. "My wagon's outside. In this weather, nonsense," Jackson insisted. "You'll stay too, there's plenty of room." And so it was decided. Mrs. Peterson would take the spare room, Lily would sleep in her own bed, and Daphne would share with her. Jackson, despite everyone's protests, maintained that he would be perfectly comfortable in the barn loft, where he often slept during calving season anyway. The evening developed a cozy, impromptu quality as they worked together to prepare a simple supper from the supplies in Jackson's pantry. Lily chattered excitedly about her day making preserves, thrilled to have both her father and her new favorite person, Miss Daphne, as a captive audience. After the meal, with the storm still raging outside, they gathered in the living room. Mrs. Peterson produced a deck of cards from her seemingly bottomless handbag, and they taught Lily to play a simple version of whist. The child's delight in the game, and in the rare treat of having company during a storm, was infectious. As the evening wore on, however, Lily's eyelids began to droop despite her best efforts to stay awake. "Bedtime, young lady," Jackson announced after she yawned for the third time in as many minutes. "But I'm not tired, Pa," Lily protested, even as she rubbed her eyes. "Of course you're not," he agreed with gentle humor. "But Miss Daphne is, and since she's sharing your room tonight, you need to show her what a good hostess you are." This approach worked where a direct order might have failed. Lily immediately perked up at the idea of being a proper hostess to her teacher. "I can show you my nightgown collection," she told Daphne earnestly, "and my special pillow that Grandma Zimmerman made before she went to heaven." "I would like that very much," Daphne replied, touched by the child's eagerness to share her treasures. After saying goodnight to the adults, Lily led Daphne upstairs to her room. The nighttime routine was unfamiliar to Daphne, who had never had younger siblings or nieces to care for, but Lily seemed perfectly capable of getting herself ready for bed with minimal assistance. Still, there was something sweet about helping the child brush her hair and listening to her prayers. Once Lily was settled under the covers, she looked up at Daphne with serious blue eyes. "Miss Daphne, who's going to tuck me in?" "Well, I'm sure your father will be up in a moment to do that," Daphne replied, surprised by the question. "But he has to go all the way to the barn in the rain," Lily pointed out with impeccable 6-year-old logic. "And you're right here." "Would you like me to tuck you in, Lily?" Daphne asked carefully. The child nodded, her expression solemn. "If you'll let me, I'd like that very much." Something in the way she phrased it so adult, so earnest touched Daphne deeply. "Of course I'll tuck you in," she said softly. She smoothed the blankets around the small form, making sure Lily was warm and comfortable. Then, following an instinct she didn't quite understand, she leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to the child's forehead. "Sweet dreams, Lily," she whispered. "G-night, Miss Daphne," Lily murmured, already half asleep. "I'm glad you came to our town." "So am I," Daphne replied, surprised by how completely she meant it. She was still sitting on the edge of the bed, watching Lily drift into sleep when Jackson appeared in the doorway. He stood silently for a moment, observing the scene with an unreadable expression. "She asked me to tuck her in," Daphne explained quietly, suddenly uncertain. "I hope that was all right," Jackson's face softened. More than all right, he assured her, his voice barely above a whisper. It's good for her to have that kind of care. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of possibilities, of a future neither had dared imagine until now. Daphne felt her heart swell with an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name, but that grew stronger with each passing day. "Good night, Jackson," she said softly, rising from the bed. "Good night, Daphne," he replied. "Sleep well." As he turned to go, Lily stirred slightly. "Pa," she mumbled drowsily. "Is Miss Daphne going to stay?" Jackson glanced at Daphne, a question in his eyes. "For tonight, yes," he told his daughter. "No," Lily insisted with surprising clarity for a child half asleep. "I mean forever, like a mama." The innocent question hung in the air between them. Jackson looked momentarily stunned while Daphne felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's not something for you to worry about now, Lily girl," Jackson said gently. "Go to sleep." But as they exchanged one last glance before Jackson headed back downstairs, Daphne knew that Lily's question would linger in both their minds throughout the night. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a freshly washed landscape and a sky of perfect blue. After breakfast, Jackson drove Daphne and Mrs. Peterson back to town in his wagon, with Lily bouncing excitedly between them on the seat. Over the next few weeks, as summer faded into the golden hues of early autumn, Daphne settled into her role as Whispering Creek schoolteacher. The children, while indeed more independent than her Boston pupils, proved eager to learn and quick to accept her authority. Lily, as expected, was a model student, though Daphne was careful not to show her any special treatment. Jackson called on her regularly, sometimes with Lily in tow, sometimes alone. They went riding on Sunday afternoons, explored the countryside around Whispering Creek, and attended church socials together. To the observant eyes of the townspeople, their growing attachment was obvious, though both maintained a proper distance in public. It was during one of their Sunday rides, as September gave way to October, and the first hints of frost touched the mornings, that Jackson finally spoke what had been growing between them for weeks. They had stopped to rest the horses near the spot by the creek where they'd picnicked that stormy day in August. Lily had stayed behind with Mrs. Peterson, ostensibly to help make apple pies, though Daphne suspected the arrangement had been Jackson's idea. "Daphne," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "I've been wanting to talk to you about something important." She turned to him, her heart quickening despite her efforts to remain calm. "Yes, these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing you with the children, with Lily." He paused, searching for the right words. "I know it hasn't been long by most standards, but out here, life doesn't always allow for long courtships." "No, it doesn't," Daphne agreed softly, encouraging him to continue. "What I'm trying to say, not very well, I'm afraid, is that I care for you, Daphne, more than I thought possible after Sarah. Different, but just as real." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "And if you feel the same, I'd like to court you properly with the intention of marriage." Though she had anticipated this conversation, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Jackson," she began, "I care for you too, very much, and Lily, she's become so dear to me." "She adores you," he said, a smile warming his eyes. "Asks every night if you're going to stay forever, like a mama." Daphne's heart constricted at the words. "Does she?" Jackson nodded. "I've been careful not to encourage false hopes, but children see more than we give them credit for. She sensed something between us before I was even willing to admit it to myself." "And now," Daphne asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "now I'm asking if you could see a future here," he said simply. "With me, with Lily. It won't always be easy. Ranch life has its hardships, and I know it's different from what you're used to. But I think we could build something good together, something lasting." Daphne thought of the life she'd left behind in Boston, the comfortable but confining society, the predetermined path, the marriage that would have been a cage rather than a partnership. Then she thought of what she'd found here in Whispering Creek: purpose, respect, community, and most unexpectedly, love. "I can more than see it, Jackson," she replied, squeezing his hand. "I want it. I want a life with you and Lily." The joy that spread across his face was answer enough, but he reinforced it by drawing her close and, with a questioning look that she answered with a nod, kissing her gently. It was a brief kiss, sweet and full of promise, but it sealed something between them that both had been feeling for weeks. "I love you, Daphne Zimmerman," he murmured against her hair as he held her. "And I love you, Jackson Zimmerman," she replied, marveling at how right the words felt. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Whispering Creek with the entire town in attendance. Lily, radiant in a new dress sewn by Mrs. Peterson, served as their only attendant, proudly carrying a bouquet of late autumn flowers and beaming throughout the ceremony. Daphne wore a simple ivory dress that Jackson had ordered from Laramie as a surprise, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers similar to the ones Lily had picked for her that first day. Judge Parker performed the ceremony, his dignified presence lending weight to the simple words that bound them together as husband and wife. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge announced as the ceremony concluded, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Zimmerman and their daughter, Lily." The inclusion of Lily in the introduction brought tears to Daphne's eyes. She knelt down to the child's level, heedless of her wedding dress, and opened her arms. "We're a family now, Lily," she said softly as the little girl rushed into her embrace. "For always." "I knew you'd stay forever," Lily whispered back, clinging to her with surprising strength. "I asked Pa if you could be my new mama, and he said we had to wait and see, but I knew." Over Lily's head, Daphne met Jackson's gaze, seeing in his eyes the same joy and certainty that filled her heart. They had found each other against all odds, across a continent and despite the wounds of the past. "She's right," Jackson said, joining their embrace. "Some things you just know." The years that followed brought challenges, as frontier life always did, but also immeasurable joy. Daphne continued teaching at the schoolhouse until the following spring, when the arrival of their first child, a son they named Henry, after Jackson's father necessitated a temporary replacement. By the time Henry was walking, Daphne had returned to teaching, bringing her infant son with her to school each day. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows initially, but the practical people of Whispering Creek soon accepted it as a sensible solution. After all, who better to demonstrate the value of education than a teacher who lived it so completely? Lily thrived with Daphne's guidance, growing into a confident young woman who eventually followed in her stepmother's footsteps and became a teacher herself. She never called Daphne mother. Sarah's memory remained honored in their home, but the bond between them was as deep and true as any biological connection. 2 more children joined their family over the years, a daughter, Clara, named after the teacher who had inadvertently brought Jackson and Daphne together by leaving Whispering Creek for love, and another son, William, who arrived as a surprise blessing when they thought their family complete. Whispering Creek grew along with the Zimmerman family, eventually becoming a proper town with a mayor, Jackson, for several terms, though he insisted it was only because no one else wanted the job, and even a small lending library that Daphne established in a corner of the expanded schoolhouse. On warm summer evenings, when the day's work was done, Jackson and Daphne would often sit on the porch of the ranch house, watching their children play in the yard while the setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Jackson asked her once, 20 years into their marriage, as they observed their youngest grandson toddle after a butterfly in the garden Daphne had planted when she first came to the ranch as a bride. She considered the question seriously, as she did all things. "I miss certain conveniences," she admitted. "Hot water on demand, bookshops, theater performances." She smiled at him, the lines around her eyes deepening with genuine happiness. "But I've never, not for a single day, regretted coming west or marrying you." Jackson took her hand, his touch still sending a current of warmth through her after all these years. "Even with all the hardships, the drought of '83, the winter we nearly lost the whole herd, Henry's fever that first year, even then," she assured him, "because we faced them together. And because for every hardship, there have been 100 joys," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I thank God every day that you were brave enough to leave everything you knew and come to this wild place. And I thank God that you were brave enough to love again after losing Sarah," she replied softly. "That you opened your heart to me and let me into your family." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them, secure in the life they had built together. A life neither could have imagined that August day when a newly arrived schoolteacher rode into a dusty frontier town, and a widowed rancher with a precocious daughter was there to welcome her home.